My name is Kate O'Hare-Palmer, and I was an Army nurse in Vietnam in 1968 and 69. I was an operating room, emergency room nurse. That's where I served. And I served in two different places. One was an evacuation hospital, 312th Evac, that had grown so big from second surge. And then I served down in Lai Kay in 1969 for 8 months with second surge hospital in a mobile unit surgical transport. So that was like a 60-bed hospital. So that was what I did when I was in Vietnam. So then I came home, got married, and worked in a civilian hospital for a few years, and I started getting really interested in women veterans affairs with the dedication of the Women's Memorial in 1993. Came home from the war, and I think what's important is when we came home from the war I came home in '69, it was not a popular war. And we had some really bad incidences happen to us just getting off the bus coming back from Travis Air Base. I had rotten vegetables thrown on me. I got out of my uniform, and then we went to Fort Stewart in Georgia with my husband. And we were there for a while, and I was working in the operating room, and unbeknownst to me, because we didn't know what flashbacks were, we didn't know what PTSD was, I started to have nightmares. And my nightmares were pretty vivid, and they were about the blood dripping down the walls. I would be lying in bed, and the blood would be dripping on me, because that actually was what happened to me in Vietnam. I was covered in blood. We were covered in blood because there were so many times that we had heavy-duty cases. I fell in blood. So I didn't understand what was happening to me, and I got nervous and afraid that I wasn't strong anymore. And I thought I'd gotten through the war, been so strong, and I didn't want to share that with my husband, and I ran away. I took off. I went and saw a psychiatrist, but of course I didn't tell him that I'd been a nurse in Vietnam. So they thought it was due to other things, right? And then I just stuffed it again, which is what is a common trait of a vet. You stuff your experience. And I pulled it together, hung out with friends for a while, and did couch surfing. And stayed with friends for a while, and finally got it together, and started back to school, worked part-time. You have to understand, I stuffed everything and did a whole lifetime, couple of lives, right? I didn't look at PTSD as an issue until after the dedication of the Women's Memorial in 1993. So you're talking a 25-year period. And then after about a year, I realized, wow, I might have this. And I had worked at the VA as a nursing supervisor for 18 years. But my understanding of PTSD was it was only for the grunts. It was only for the people that were in the jungle. And I didn't have that. Lily Adams helped me get into treatment at a local vet center, which I highly recommend veteran centers, vet centers, because your stuff is private. I was still in the workforce. I was afraid of losing my job. I had small children. But after I got into the vet center, within 7 months, I had a service connection for PTSD.
My name is Marsha Four. I was fortunate enough to have become a member of Vietnam Veterans of America. I entered the military through a vehicle that was used a great deal during the Vietnam War, and that was having the recruiters come into the School of Nursing, because we had a 12-month tour in Vietnam, and they had to keep backfilling those nurses who left country. And as it turned out, 20% of my nurses training class did join the military. I had, my first assignment was at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. I was there about 6 months before I got my orders for Vietnam, which was pretty startling, since the recruiter said I would be able to be assigned to the one of 3 bases that I requested, and I would never go overseas unless I requested it. as ignorant as we all were, we didn't ask for that in writing. So rather than going to Denver, San Francisco, or Honolulu, I went to Fort Campbell, Kentucky. My parents, of course, were very concerned and very upset, and my father's response basically was, what did you all expect? She's in the military and they own her. Quite frankly, I think that many of us didn't realize that we were going to be involved in a war. I was more interested in, was I going to pass my grades, and did I have a date Friday night? So when I was going to Vietnam, I knew I was going to a war, but I assumed I would be in a hospital and just doing what nurses do in hospitals and taking care of the patients. But it became quite real as we flew in country on the transport from the States that I was living in real time now, and the situation was a far greater experience than I ever thought or imagined it could be. Luckily, I had a friend who was already in Vietnam from my school of nursing at one of the hospitals, and so I did request going and being assigned to that same hospital so I would know somebody. You're on the other side of the world from everything you know and every person that's ever been your friend or your supporter and your family, and you might as well have been on another planet. We didn't have phones, and we couldn't text, and we didn't email, and we couldn't call, and you were very alone and very afraid and had no idea what was coming next. I fortunately was assigned to the same hospital as my girlfriend Carol. We did work 12-hour shifts. We were lucky if we got a day off. Sometimes you work 12 or 14 and then you'd maybe get 2 days off, but quite frankly, really there was nowhere else to go, so it really didn't matter. And even though I was assigned to the intensive care recovery room when I was on duty, when you were off duty, oftentimes you worked in the emergency room because there were so few staff that when mass casualties came in, you went where the work was. When you're in a small group like that and you're all in the same lifeboat, you cling to each other for hope and for support, and they become soulmates forever. As I was leaving, and they have such ambiguous feelings about leaving. I knew I would never see these people again, and they were the most important people in my life.
Right.
In some respects, we saved each other's lives. And so to leave there, I knew I would probably never ever see them again. And for a minute, it's like, maybe I don't want to go home. We became, and we knew we were the best nurses on the planet by the time we left Vietnam. And we were so driven by the explosive nature of our job, our position, we saved lives. And by the other side of the coin, we also helped a lot of people die. When I came back from Vietnam, I was pretty lost, and I recognized very quickly that I just didn't feel like I fit in anywhere. I wasn't the same person. I felt like I had a different connection with friends from the past. They could never understand what it was like or what it went through. And within about a month after I got home, a friend who I had met in Vietnam came by with his Volkswagen van that had been turned into a portable camper, and we took off and traveled for about 5 months or so, and just camped across the country. Ran out of money, had to live in the desert, but finally I recognized I had to make some money. So I did go in and out of nursing over a number of decades. The interesting thing is I did marry the man that I traveled in the van with, who I met in Vietnam, actually. So we did share some understanding of what our past was like. And eventually in 1987, I joined Vietnam Veterans of America. At that moment, I knew I found the place where I was supposed to be.
Did you search out other people that you had worked with or something? Or
Well, if you recall, I mentioned that one of the women that was
Yeah.
at the hospital I went
Yeah.
to, I still see her because we went to nurses training together.
Okay.
So we see each other actually quite frequently.
Okay.
And she married one of the helicopter pilots from our dust-off unit.
Oh, there you go.
And the dust-off unit has reunions. And 2
Oh,
years ago, I
yes.
went back to the reunion that they had because they've now incorporated our hospital with their dust-off unit for
That's
the
how you do
reunions.
that. Okay.
So it was just
Yeah.
a remarkable. And they started talking, and I kept coming back and coming back.
Because
And
they
it
were
just-
advocating for things that we needed that no other
And
service
that's how I
organization.
found out
Yeah.
what we had
Yeah.
as women, I'll say,
Right.
what we didn't have,
Right.
what was unfair, unjust, and somebody needed to do something about it,
Right.
which probably meant me, just like you felt, we have to do this.
Well, what did I do?
Because-
I became a nursing supervisor at the VA hospital. I started in the ranks because I came up through the ranks, but then ended up managing the outpatient. But I was inside, and I did a human studies unit for 5 years. It was a great job and things. But once I got in the VA and I realized the inequities for what women didn't have in a VA hospital in San Francisco, California. I mean, they didn't even have separate, they were putting men and women together in a room with a curtain between them. And it was unbelievable.
My first opportunity to meet really some of the women who were very early in VVA was in '89 at the convention in Chicago.
Okay.
That's where I met most of them. And really began to sit with them and talk about what they knew we needed that we didn't have.
Okay.
And through that, through those connections and those relationships and those friendships, and actually in '89 I met Mary Stout, who was then elected for president of the organization. She encouraged me to start coming to the national and be on committees. And also, she put my name in, and I was really fortunate in '92 to be invited to be on the Secretary's Advisory Committee for Women Veterans,
Okay.
which opened up so much information to me that I was unaware of, and allowed me to have a voice at a table that could represent women veterans and let the Secretary of the VA know our concerns and what we thought would be some opportunities that he needed to consider
For change.
for change in the VA.
Yeah.
And between that and the connection with VVA, I was just sucked in,
So at that point,
and
were
it was
you
all I could do.
Yeah.
It was all
That
that
was-
I could do. It was my now
Your
reason
mission.
for being in some respects. And
So did you ever feel, because you made it home, why were you still here? Why did you live? Did you ever feel that?
I didn't feel why did I live and come home. What I did feel like was because I did, I had a responsibility. Some things were coming to me that gave me an opportunity to continue doing something that needed to be done.
Right.
And in some ways, and I look at it as almost being nursing on a different plane.
Right. Right.
On a different plane. And I think that's what just, it was like everyone was just embracing us as women veterans, which we did not find anywhere else.
No, we didn't find it anywhere
No.
else. And it was, I think for me, it was such a shock. Coming home, working in the private sector in the beginning, before I went to the VA, it was like the VA became another place where I was accepted. because in the private sector, it really felt foreign, and we weren't able to do the job that we'd done, because like you said, we had a skill set, and we knew it, and we could not continue to do that when we came home. But like you, I felt like there's got to be a better way for what's happening to us as veterans. I felt guilty for a while that I had lived. I did. And I felt like, we'd been in some dicey situations, but for a long time, it was very difficult for me to go to the wall. It was very difficult to go to the wall because to me, it did represent all the people that we didn't save.
Well, that's more of how, when I say I have guilt, that's more of how I have guilt. Not that I came home, but that we weren't able to do it all.
Right.
And it's the one thing, I remember speaking to a large number of Gold Star mothers. And one of the things that I was compelled to say was that it was not our fault, that we tried everything we could.
Right.
We used all of our experience, and we tried, and it just sometimes didn't work. Didn't work. But if they made it to the hospital, they weren't alone.
Right.
And I really take heart at knowing that we were there when somebody was leaving us, and how extremely fortunate we were to be a part of that experience in their lives. Because in my mind, it's the most emotional
It is.
and blessed experience that we will ever have in our lifetimes.
It is. I think the other thing for me was I finally learned through some really good therapy was how many people we saved. We focused on, because we wanted to be the best and we wanted to do it all, and then we realized it was overwhelming and we couldn't. But to finally recognize, and I think that's another reason why VVA was so important, is, do you remember the first meeting I went to when I came back to Washington, when we at Silver Springs? And I stood up there and I was channeling my brother because he had passed away. But it was like, I looked around at everybody in the room and I said, you're all alive. Do you remember? You don't remember that? Pete Peterson came right over and hugged me. But it was so overwhelming to me because I had spent so many years in my head about the people that I didn't save. And then I could switch over to look how many people came home. Look how many people are here. And look at the lives they've lived and the pictures of their kids and grandkids and,
And how many people their lives have touched.
Yeah.
Because of that.
Yeah. So that was a real switch, And then to, of course, how long? You were the Women Veterans Chair for 10 years before you became Vice President? Yeah.
I think so.
There's been like 5 or 6 Women Veterans Chair over time. And when you look at what it was in the beginning and what you were fighting for women veterans and how far it's come and the coordination between the other veteran service organizations with their women veterans chairs. But it's, I think I'm still astounded at the legislation that you've helped get through, but how far we still have to go. How far we have to go.
I think, when I looked at being involved in VVA, of course I was a nurse, and I really didn't have any other women military friends at the time that were not nurses.
Right.
But pretty early on in VVA, probably only 2 or 3 years after I joined the organization, I was more and more involved with the chapter activities, and we would go to different parades and things of that nature. And I was then introduced into a world of women veterans that were not nurses.
Right.
And actually one of my very good friends, Sandy Miller, lives probably 40, 50 miles from where I do, and she happened to be at a parade that I was with my chapter. And it was like, Marsha, come over here. There's another woman veteran. Come here, come here. So we met, and I've known her since, well, probably almost 30 years, 25, 30 years. But that was when my eyes really opened to the fact that there were, 250,000 women who served in the
That's
military
right.
during Vietnam?
That's right.
There were only 7,000 or 8,000 of us in Vietnam.
Yeah.
The rest of them were all across the world.
Right.
And there were almost 1,000 women in Vietnam who were not nurses.
That's right.
And as far as women in Vietnam, they're the ones that are really, really forgotten in-country women.
It's true.
And I happened over, some time making friends with a number of them and working together with them and their organization
And that- I
in
think-
helping to
yeah,
foster that
to foster that
non-Vietnam in-country woman.
non-medical.
Yes.
Non-medical, because there are so many other women that what they did was just as important. And I'm glad that this year, on the 25th anniversary for the Vietnam Women's Memorial, that everyone that's speaking, everyone that is going to address things is the non-in-country woman veteran. And it's time, and those stories need to be told, and we're all together, we're all sisters.
We are.
We're all sisters. There were 20% male nurses in Vietnam, but when you look at the people that did other jobs, I met some aircraft mechanics that were over in Chulai. There were women, that was pretty rare. I didn't see them when I came home, but and 250,000 women served. And you look at how they came home, and that was the other thing we were talking about before was, we came home and we could be invisible. We didn't have short haircuts.
That's right.
We weren't like the men. So we came home and and because of the flack that we were getting, a lot of us just went underground, and we never said we were in Vietnam. We didn't consider ourselves veterans. We did not. I did. And actually,
I never thought about it, actually.
both my parents were Army Air Corps. I mean, I grew up in a military family. My cousins are Navy. But I didn't really consider myself a veteran because I didn't feel that what I did, even though I was where I served. So when it started talking about benefits for veterans, you're going, what's that? I just didn't feel like I was really eligible or I deserved. That's for the other people. That's not for me. That was kind of how it started for me. In the state of California, we have 2.1 million veterans. We have 186,000 women veterans. We've done 3 different studies over the last 8 years, and the biggest thing that we are still dealing with is the words, have you served? We had to change the question from are you a veteran to have you served? Because that is what needs to come out for women to understand that they are a veteran.
And that they don't have to have served during a designated
Right.
campaign,
Right.
that even if they were a Cold War veteran, they were stationed
Right,
stateside.
exactly.
They're still
If
entitled.
they served in the military.
They put
Correct.
on a uniform. They signed their life away for a few years. But yeah, that's a big thing that's still, and we're working on it. And I think every state has their issues. We're a pretty big state in California, so they've been working on it at Department of Veterans Affairs level, but it's still got a long ways to go, and know what what women's benefits are if they did serve.
And
The
I think,
education
yeah.
benefits are way better now than they used to.
And I
be.
think, when we got back, so much was lacking for women veterans. And there were, a number of women who took up the sword and decided it was time, things had to change. And we went about changing, the mindset of the VA, helping to work toward attaining better health care, primary care providers that had women's health experiences, looking at the benefits that were actually due to women. We could get that started and rolling. And I think that as that did, the VA became more attentive to women. And they, in fact, also started some outreach campaigns, which helped. But it's even, I think, especially when the first Gulf War came in, and now the later, women that are in, being a woman in the military is not a secret anymore. When we started,
There was
a
cap.
question about, there are women in the military?
Well, yeah, and
you know.
because there was a cap. I mean, there was a cap, a 2% congressional cap on how many women can
Could be
serve
in the
in the
military.
military. And Sandy Miller in her homeless seminar this morning talked about, it took a while before that was changed, the mid-70s. That's when that was lifted so that more than 2% could serve in the military. Right. And that made a big difference of who could come in and what they wanted to do with their lives. And it opened up, because for women, actually, in the 70s, the military was an equal opportunity employer, because everybody, what you got paid was what your rank was. And that was unusual compared to private sector.
The other thing that changed too was women were in their own separate corps.
That's
The
true.
Women's Army Corps,
Right.
the Waves,
Right.
the
And
WACs,
then they started
and we were
to-
all separate and all separated. Now, women are part of the force.
Right.
They are the force. And I think that brought women together into being part of the military. And
Well,
I think
it's
that's
eight,
helped
yeah.
a great deal for the women of today.
And there's a higher percentage in the military. There's 15%, 18% active duty, 15%. Wasn't that way when we were in, so.
So
Yeah, lots of
it's
changes.
just been a convergence of many different components that have helped to advance the recognition, the identification, the advancement of services for women,
Right.
and it all has been marching forward, as it has from the beginning. I mean, we certainly couldn't have been where we were at unless the women that we saw before us and recognized what
Right.
we still needed
Right.
could help for those women that would come after us. So it's been,
It's a haul.
it's a haul, but you know what? We certainly were part of the change.
I know, it's true. It's true.
We certainly were part of the change.